Right, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for the invitation along to the Edinburgh University Politics Society. It's a pleasure to be with you. I hot-footed up here from the Scottish Parliament, where I was enjoying a drink reception, which has been held to celebrate Alcohol Awareness Week. So read into that what you will. I should say at the outset, it's not my intention is either necessarily to say I'm an advocate for new nuclear power stations, but I don't actually think the government should be about choosing different types of energy. But the subject of debate is, are the costs and risks of nuclear power outweighed by necessity? And I think I'd have to answer to that question in the short to medium term. I think the answer has to be yes, and therefore I'm happy to make the case for the proposition. I think it's fair to say that nuclear power has a bad press. If you mention nuclear power, people think either of Chernobyl, which is still very much in people's minds, or they think of Montgomery Burns' Springfield power plant and all the impact that has on the environment. What I want to do tonight, having listened with great interest to what Patrick had to say, is look at four particular issues. First of all, the contribution that nuclear generation makes to our energy mix. Secondly, the question of the level of CO2 emissions from nuclear. Thirdly, the cost issue. And finally, the issue of safety. First of all, in relation to this whole question of the contribution nuclear makes to our energy mix, I got some figures for the Scottish Parliament this is Scotland's electricity generation in 2005, broken down by percentage. Coal produced 24.8% of our output, oil 5.6%, gas 16.9%, nuclear produced 38.1%, hydro 10.7%, and other renewables 3.8%. Well, these are the figures for 2005, which is the last year I could get definite figures for. I suspect if we compared that with today, we would find the renewables figure gone up a bit since then, but the overall balance wouldn't have shifted very much. And I think the really important point I want to stress there is that nuclear makes up out of electricity generation 38.1% of our electricity output. Of course, the largest part of our electricity generation comes from coal, oil and gas, fossil fuels. Between them, 48% of our total comes from fossil fuels. And I think everybody would agree that what we want to be doing is reducing the dependence upon fossil fuels and not increasing it. I think there is a concern that we are facing an energy gap, because we have two nuclear power stations in Scotland. We have Hunterston in Ayrshire, and we have Torness in East Lothian. On current estimates, Hunterston is due to go offline in 2015. Torness is due to go offline in 2023. The question is, how do we replace that 38% of our electricity generation within that timescale? Now, Patrick made, I think, some perfectly fair points about the need to reduce overall electricity demand. The problem is, as Patrick well knows, is that electricity demand actually is increasing year on year and has been doing so exponentially. And if we want to turn around that increase, it's going to take an awful long time for us to make that happen. Never mind get it down to the sort of levels that would reduce these headline figures as they were at 2005. And of course, nuclear power produces what we call baseload capacity. That is, and I accept, Patrick made the point about the occasional nuclear power station having to go offline. But over the piece, over the last 50 years, nuclear power has produced a constancy of supply that outstrips any other form of generation, as I'm sure he well knows. And therefore, what nuclear power provides is a constant and predictable baseload, because there's demand for electricity goes up and down. It varies throughout the day. In the middle of the night, it's very low. During the working day, when industrial processes are going on, people are at their work, the lights are on, and the heating's on, it goes up much higher. And therefore, what you need for an energy mix is a base load, which is constant, which can then be topped up by a variable supply on top of that. And what nuclear power is very good at supplying is a base load. It provides a constant output of electricity that doesn't vary throughout the day. And you can then switch on and off, as we do at the moment, your conventional fossil fuel burning stations, which can very easily be turned up or down to fill the gaps in supply. And of course, that ability to supply base load cannot easily be replaced. It could be replaced with fossil fuels. It cannot easily be replaced with current renewable technology. Because with the exception of hydro, certainly wind power cannot provide baseload due to the lack of certainty as to when the wind is going to blow and at what strength, and particularly in relation to the question of intermittency. So there is a baseload capacity, 38% of our current output, being provided by nuclear. If we get rid of that, how do we replace it? We have two options. First option, the desirable option, would be renewables. The problem we have is the current renewable technologies, the developed renewable technologies, are hydro and wind. Hydro is pretty much a capacity in Scotland in terms of large-scale developments. Scottish Hydroelectric are currently developing the Glendoe scheme beside Loch Ness, just south of Inverness. When that is developed and comes on stream, that will be, according to Scottish Hydro, the last large-scale onshore hydro scheme that Scotland has capacity to take. We will see other small-scale hydro schemes, and many of these are in the pipeline, but they will not provide a large capacity. Wind, whatever you think, if you're pro or against onshore wind or not, is simply wind cannot provide that 38% that nuclear currently provides. I would like to think that when we develop, in particular, tidal technology, offshore technology such as tidal, that could provide baseload. The problem is we're probably, on best estimates, 20 years away from developing that tidal capacity. So remember the figures I gave you, 2015 for Hunterston, 2023 for Torness. There is no possibility that renewables can fill that gap within that timescale. So what we're left with, if we don't extend the lives of our existing nuclear power stations, is to increase fossil fuel dependency. And I don't think that's a good thing. It's not a good thing because of the whole issue of CO2 emissions, and it's not a good thing because of the whole question that Patrick touched on of security of supply. Because already Britain is now a net importer of gas, and the gas we're using in this country is for the first time having to be imported from Russia. And that's not good in terms of our future economic planning. And it's very interesting because if you ask people the question in public opinions, public surveys about whether they're pro or anti-nuclear, if you ask them the very simple question, they tend to be against. But if you put the question in the context of security of supply, if the alternative is burning more fossil fuels and importing those from Russia, then public opinion tends to shift around and people are much more pro-nuclear than would otherwise be the case. I want to move on if I can and speak about the question of CO2 emissions. And again, I would agree with Patrick's basic contention that we want to develop sources of energy that have the lowest possible output of CO2. The process of nuclear fission emits no CO2. However, that's not the end of the story, because of course all sources of energy do have a CO2 footprint, because they involve construction, they involve extraction of raw materials, and they involve, in some courses, transport, and in all cases, transmission. So all sources of energy, including renewables, do have some CO2 cost. Compared to fossil fuels, nuclear will save something like 12 to 24 million tonnes of carbon per year in the UK, depending on which fossil fuel you compare it to. There were two major studies done into the life cycle emissions of nuclear, one by the IAEA and one by the International Energy Authority, which said that nuclear had the lowest CO2 emissions of any form of electricity generation. Now, Patrick will of course say that one was done by the Atomic Energy Authority and therefore is bound to be biased in its view. So Greenpeace did their own study, and Greenpeace, who of course are an anti-nuclear organisation, said that the CO2 output from nuclear, including the cost of construction, transport and extraction, was 50% higher than wind power. Still very, very low, and much, much lower than fossil fuels. So there's no doubt, in terms of the spread of electricity generation, nuclear is a low CO2